Welcome back, everybody. I am so thrilled to be with you here today. I cannot believe that we are on episode number 200. To be honest, when I was looking at episode 200, I wanted to do something really fancy, really fun with the podcast, maybe a medley of all of the best moments, but really, when it came down to it, number one, I'm not really a planner when it comes to this podcast. So let's be really honest. The way that I have created this podcast and these 200 episodes over the last 5 years has come from inspiration of what is going on in my own life, what is going on in my client's life, and how I can more simply explain all of the ways our mind, our brain, our body, our energy, our relationships impact the way that we show up fully for our own pleasure, for us to really start to reclaim our own pleasure. And for the last 5 years in these episodes, I hope that I have demonstrated to you, number one, how important pleasure really is. I think that as a society and the narrative that we've been fed for so long is pleasure is not a priority. It's not that important. It's not ever really talked about when we talk about personal growth. We are just now starting to talk about our sexuality in the terms of the personal growth world, in the self-advocacy world. Doctors are starting to talk about our sexuality when this really was reserved when there was only a problem before. So we as a society and a culture are starting to finally tap into the fact that pleasure is essential for our overall well-being, that healing these relationships that we have when it comes to our bodies, the way that we think about our bodies, the way that we're showing up in our relationships, the way that we are reclaiming our sexuality and looking at sexuality in a different way are important because we are important, because the way that we are nourished, taken care of, resourced is important. And the reason that I created this podcast, what seems like forever ago, was because I wanted to get the word out there. I wanted to share this knowledge because I truly believe that the more women that are pleasured in this world, that everybody wins. Because the more that we're showing up fully integrated, the more we're showing up supported from the inside out, and therefore asking, demanding the kind of support that we deserve in our society in a way that's conducive to everybody and a beautiful, like harmonious community. And also to start planting beliefs, to really start changing the stories that we have when it comes to our sexuality, the way that we are re-educating ourselves. Because I have daughters, and I remember when my first daughter was born, I didn't know before she was born what gender that she was. And when it was a girl, one of the things that I really wanted to pay attention to was the kind of stories that I could heal that would help me mother her better, that could set her up with a foundation where maybe she didn't reject her body as much as I did. Maybe she decided to advocate for her own pleasure, that when she started getting into a relationship or started dating, that she wasn't embarrassed about her desires, that she wasn't feeling shameful, that she knew how to communicate about her own body and feel comfortable and safe enough in her body to be able to explore it so that she could have these communications. So many of the things that most of the women, if you're listening to this podcast, we didn't have growing up, that we didn't have these kind of messages, this kind of education, this kind of encouragement that our pleasure mattered, that our bodies were beautiful, that our sexuality was meant to be embraced. And even if just a small percentage of the humans growing up in this world can start to see that this is such an important part of who they are, that they deserve, that each and every one of us deserves to feel lit up in our bodies, that each and every one of us deserves to feel harmonious in the way that we approach our sexuality, that we balance our nervous system for safety, that we can go out and express our desires in such a way that we feel worthy of receiving them. That is why I'm here. That is what lights me up. It is for us right now to heal, to change, to embrace, to reclaim, but it's also for them. It's also how I know that those stories and those messages are going to trickle down, just like the stories and the messages that we were delivered when we were young has impacted us, usually in a way where we do feel a little shame, where we are rejecting, where we don't feel like it's for us, where we have been told that it's more important to be desirable than to ever actually pay attention to your own desires. That did not come from our biology. We were not born with these beliefs. We learned them. And over time, the messages, the experiences, the stories that we've heard, those had an energetic imprint on us. Those created thoughts, and those thoughts created this neural activity. And as that neural activity continued, and as we started to have these same patterns of neural activity, these same paths, guess what happened? We began to develop beliefs. We began to develop beliefs around our body, that we shouldn't touch it, that maybe it was icky, that we needed to keep it private. As we started to grow up, we started to develop even more thoughts that were based on other messages that we were receiving, that we should look a certain way and that we should make sure that we cover up. We don't want to give anybody the wrong idea. We don't want to give anybody the wrong message. So make sure you're covered up. But also, make sure that you're taking care of yourself. Make sure that you're desirable, because of course that is part of our purpose, to be coupled, to be partnered later. So we want to make sure that we're also desirable, but don't think about your own desires. Just make sure that you're desirable, but just a little bit, but not too much. And then as we started to explore, it was like, oh, well, don't lead anybody on. Don't give them the wrong idea, but then also don't be too much. Don't be a slut. All of the mixed messages that then created more and more neural connections. Because after all, we've heard this time and time again, the neurons that fire together wire together. So more that we heard these messages, whether it was subtle messages in commercials, what was being shown in beauty standards in magazines, what our mothers or our aunties were saying when they were putting on swimsuits and going to the beach, what we heard from our peers gossiping about somebody that might have gotten it on, and then also gossiping about that person that had never gotten it on. We absorbed all of these messages, and the more that we absorbed them, the more that we kept ruminating on them, the more that we created these thoughts, those neural structures started wiring together. Our belief systems around our pleasure, around our sexuality, around our bodies started to become hardwired into who we are. And when you start having beliefs that are hardwired into you are, what happens is you continuously create these feelings, these behaviors, these attitudes that have you showing up in the world, denying pleasure, keeping your desires capped, making sure that you're just the right amount, not too much, but also not too little. As we continue to keep going, this fabric of our beliefs when it came to our pleasure, when it came to our sexuality, became more and more a part of our personality. Then if you're in a long-term relationship, especially if you're in a heterosexual relationship, and especially if you've become a mother, now it's like give to everybody else. Make sure everybody else is taken care of. Make sure you're doing the right thing. And we're being desirable in a different way. But then also make sure you're being a good wife. Make sure you're being a good partner. Make sure you're meeting your partner's needs. You can see how over time, these messages that created this neural activity in our brain, and that neural activity, as there was patterns, as it kept happening, it would create these belief systems. These belief systems, they get wired into us. And when they are associated with strong emotional reactions like shame, embarrassment, alienation, all of these sorts of things, then it becomes even more hardwired. Now it's become part of our unconscious memory. Now it's become part of who we are in the fabric of our being. And that is why I have this podcast, because in the fabric of our being, not because it's any fault of yours, not because you did this on purpose, but because of what we have continuously absorbed year after year after year after year, has kept us putting walls up, has kept us pulling back from pleasure, has kept us leaning away from rejecting parts of our body, from rejecting our sexuality, from keeping us from actually tapping into this powerful, potent thing called pleasure. So yeah, that is why I'm talking about this subject that might feel taboo, but it's finally starting to not feel taboo, because I want you to learn that because you have a human brain, by default, because we've been absorbing these messages, of course, it doesn't feel safe all the time. Of course, it doesn't feel encouraged. Of course, you don't feel curious or full of desire or radiating with pleasure. Of course. And the beautiful thing is you can change that. The beautiful thing is we can start to wake up and pay attention to some of these messages. We can start to wake up and become conscious and wake up out of our default mode, out of all of that stuff that's playing in the background that's been hardwired into us. And we can rewrite a new system. We can rewrite a new system so that our neural connections are now saying, of course, I am going to create more pleasure in my life, in my marriage, in my work. Of course, I am going to drop into my body, because I deserve to feel good. Of course, I am going to learn how to access all the pleasure and expand my orgasmic capacity, because I know what that does for my brain. I know how it turns me on. It allows me to be the social person that I want to be. It allows me to tap into that motivation system in my brain. It allows me to be well resourced and resilient and feel good. I want to rewrite that story, and I want you to also rewrite it, because we deserve to feel good. We deserve to be lit up. We deserve to have a personality, our thoughts, our feelings, our actions, our attitudes, our behaviors that are aligned and fueled by pleasure. So thank you for being here for 200 episodes. This is a really, really important movement we're doing. And I appreciate each and every one of you for every single part that you have contributing, every single time you download an episode, every single time you take the time to write, rate, and review, every single time you've signed up for one of my courses or my classes and supported me in that way so that I can keep producing this podcast. Every time you've told a friend about it, I see you. I thank you. And I just want to say we're making a difference. And for generations, our generations and the generations to come, this really matters. And you tuning in, you rewriting that story, you helping spread the word and rewriting that story, that is what is going to change the world. That is what is going to change the fabric of humanity, where women feel more at home in their body, where they feel worthy, and where they feel so much love. So, as always, it's been my absolute pleasure to be with you here today and all 200 episodes. Okay, until next time, thank you so much for joining me.